Hello everybody and welcome to this podcast on self-driving cars. I'm Eric Winkhuizen and I worked in the self-driving car industry for some years, and it was during my time there that I became convinced that self-driving cars are a really bad idea. And in this channel I want to show you some of the reasons why. The argument for self-driving cars has always been that they will be safer than human drivers. In this recent video from self-driving car apologist Brad Templeton, which is titled "Why You Don't Have a Self-Driving Car Yet," he starts off like this.
For most of us, these cars can't get here soon enough. They have the promise of avoiding a decent fraction of today's car accidents, which kill over 1 million each year around the world.
There is no doubt that safety is a powerful argument. 1 million deaths a year that could be avoided by means of self-driving cars. But it is very easy to claim that self-driving cars will be safer, as there is no evidence. I mean, the whole point of Brad's video is to explain why we don't have self-driving cars yet. Obviously, the enhanced safety of self-driving cars is just an assumption at this point. I believe a lot can be learned about self-driving car safety from taking a closer look at the multitude of videos of self-driving cars on YouTube and reflecting on what the behavior displayed by self-driving cars actually says about the safety of this technology. So today, I present some analysis of a recent drive that YouTuber Dirty Tesla recorded in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with FSD version 10.69.2.2 in September of 2022. Of course, when this video comes out, the next version of the software will be launched. But the difference between these versions of FSD is really always quite minimal. If you look at these videos over time like I have, you will be struck that sometimes the drivers will say that a new version fixed a certain problem, but just as often they will say that the new version is actually worse than the previous version.
10.4 was performing really well for me so far. Okay, now we're in the parking spots. Oh my gosh. Stop. Oh man, I just keep taking over. Like, we did this exact same route on 10.2? I can't remember, too many different version numbers, but it was so good before. This exact same thing. It was so good.
My analysis will focus on how the problems with self-driving cars are not dependent on the next version of software. They are a good deal more principled than that. They are also not just Tesla's problems. Cruise, Waymo, and Zoox and all the others have the same issues. So let's dive straight in. Chris tests the full self-driving software in downtown Ann Arbor in Michigan, a medium-sized town of about 125,000 people or so. Not exactly a difficult place to drive, but it doesn't take much to confuse a self-driving car. Here is the very beginning of his video.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another full self-driving beta video. My name is Chris and we are on the latest version 10.69.2.2, and I started in this roundabout because beta still is pretty garbage at roundabout. So I just had to press the accelerator there because it stopped after we got in the roundabout. So I just gave it a little tap.
So right away something weird happens. Instead of following the bus in front onto the roundabout, FSD suddenly stops just as it enters the roundabout. So Chris has to press the accelerator because there is no reason to stop. So what this error demonstrates is something quite simple and yet profound that I think is worth dwelling on. Whenever FSD makes an error of judgment like this one, it must rely on Chris to make the assessment that its actions were inappropriate and take over control. Chris explains his role a little later in the video.
Around here. Now, as we go into downtown here, we're going to stress test, so I'm sure we will find some bugs, and that's kind of the point of this type of video. But it's beta. I'm here for safety.
So Chris is there for safety. Of course, the idea behind FSD is that at one point it will not need a human being for safety, but this casual comment by Chris already shows one of the profound differences between the human drivers testing FSD and FSD itself. Namely, FSD drives around without any sense of whether its actions are safe or not. It lacks judgment because it just executes its algorithmic instructions, and whether it drives smoothly down the street or whether it suddenly stops for no reason, it is entirely unaware of what it is doing and whether it is driving appropriately or indeed safely. Considering how incredibly basic the capability to judge safety is assumed to be for human drivers, it is rather astonishing why we would ever want vehicles on our roads controlled by software without this critical sense to judge whether something is safe or not. But let's follow the car some more. Next, the car must make an unprotected left at an intersection with a traffic light. Chris is talking about unrelated things, as the car is supposed to be making this left turn, but the car ends up not even going.
Looks like it's being, oh, okay. Handle that well. And are we gonna go through this yellow? I would, but well, now I wouldn't. So let's skip the red.
I want to draw your attention to two different things. The first concerns self-driving car perception. Consider these pedestrians crossing in the left crosswalk. FSD, which must construct the world out of meaningless camera pixels, represents them on the screen as walking humanoid robots. Now, the perceptual processes by which the computer vision software constructs these representations of pedestrians are not perfect, and you can see here that the two pedestrians in front are represented by a single humanoid. While this may not matter so much for the driving behavior in this case, one hopes that the software would yield to a single pedestrian just as it would to a group of pedestrians. It is nevertheless disconcerting that the software has such trouble recognizing what is obvious to any human observer watching this not great quality video. Namely, that there are two people walking there, not just one. And what this demonstrates is that the internal representation of the world, which is the representation of the world in which the Tesla software operates, is not at all the same as the reality. We will see several more examples of this, but seeing one person when there are two is an obvious case. Second, note how Chris says that he would have tried to make the yellow light.
Are we gonna go through this yellow? I would.
I think most human drivers would have done that as well. Instead of staying back at the stop line, most humans would have rolled out into the intersection as the traffic light was still yellow, letting the bicyclist go ahead, but at the same time showing to everyone else that they were planning to turn left immediately after it. And I think that that is better driving actually, because completely foregoing your turn and then letting a traffic light go through the entire cycle until you get a green light once more is not great driving, especially if you have some cars behind you. The next interesting moment occurs in the next street when the truck in front does something unexpected.
So, the truck going to the other side of the road. Whoa, what the? Okay, Beta handling that pretty good actually. Slowed down and then moves out of the way. I think that was appropriate.
Chris seems to be taken by surprise by the maneuver. But while perhaps a little unexpected, such maneuvers are not at all unusual for trucks in town. And note how the truck driver turns on his hazards, thereby alerting all other road users that something is up. The truck first steers into the oncoming traffic lane and then turns back towards the right. This is a typical maneuver for a truck that needs to back up to unload or to pick something up. And because a truck is so big, it requires a little patience on the part of the other road users. Which is why the driver turns on the hazards, of course. But instead of holding back, FSD, probably seeing that its lane is clear, simply continues to drive. It ends up being fine because the truck stops before sticking its nose back into the right lane, but he certainly could have entered the right lane, and if he had done that, the Tesla would have had to slam on the brake and might have been too close for the truck to make its backing up maneuver. It is just not very smart driving to keep rolling forward like FSD does, and it stems from its inability to understand what this truck is doing. Don't think the software had any notion that the truck was preparing to back up. The inability to read other road users is further illustrated by the very next thing that happens, because just after the Tesla passes the truck, there is a pedestrian crossing.
Pretty good, actually. Slowed down and then moves out of the way. I think that was appropriate. Oh, and we're stopping here for this pedestrian. So she kind of came out there at the last second. And the car it warned me, it said like, look out, this person's coming, but the car stopped at the same time. I didn't have to interact or do anything there. So really good. There's a lot happening all at the same time, and the car seemed to handle all of that. And that's one of the strengths, is it's looking everywhere all the time.
So Chris is rather pleased with the way FSD handled this situation. But I disagree and believe that it is another example of the FSD's inability to read a situation properly, even if, in the end, the pedestrian crosses safely. Let's review what happened. Chris's video camera picks up the pedestrian approaching from the left, and presumably FSD's camera can see her as well, but she is not yet represented on the screen. Apparently, the AI perception has not yet calculated her. The pedestrian's body position as well as the direction of her movement is clearly aiming towards the pedestrian crossing. As she approaches, she looks ahead at Chris's Tesla and surely will have seen his car approaching, with no hint that it is slowing down. It is going 10 miles an hour. Then she looks over her shoulder at the approaching bus, and as soon as she looks at the bus driver flashes the bus's headlights, an unmistakable indication that the bus is going to yield to her. And of course the pedestrian sees this invitation, so she keeps walking. And now looks back towards the Tesla as she needs to see what it is going to do. But instead of slowing down like the bus, the Tesla is in the process of accelerating, now going 12 miles an hour, so it does not look like it will stop. Before stepping out, she looks back at the bus once more and sees that it is keeping its distance and steps out into the street, raising her hand to thank the driver. The Tesla has continued to accelerate, but when the pedestrian steps into the street, the Tesla slams on the brake and alarms are going off.
We're stopping here for this pedestrian.
The pedestrian now abruptly adjusts her trajectory from crossing behind the Tesla, which would have been easy had the Tesla kept going, to crossing in front of the Tesla. So everybody is safe, but again it is hardly competent driving. Slamming on the brake is sometimes necessary, but an attentive driver should only rarely have to slam on the brake, and in this case there surely was no need. The problem is that FSD just does not understand human behavior. The next intersection further illustrates this point.
Looks like a lot of pedestrians, and we're really far back, which just is kind of awkward. No one's behind us for now, so I'm leaving it, but we'll see how it goes. So we're getting honked at, so I'm just gonna push up the accelerator a bit, but of course we can't go because there's people walking in front of us, but the car needs to really inch out. So I'm pushing it just a little more, but so people just keep walking out. So he's telling me to go. So I pushed it. And the car, so I had to push it through there. I hate to do it because so that's definitely an intervention there. I hate to do it because it's one of those where kind of the right decision from the car.
Nobody understands why the car stops so far from the stop line. But what is clear to everybody is that FSD stops way too far back. Chris comments on it himself and only accepts it because there's nobody behind it. When the bus driver comes up behind him, she honks right away. Chris immediately knows that the honk is for him and presses the accelerator to get closer to the pedestrian crossing. And when a pedestrian waves Chris on, he takes control of the car and makes the turn even though that pedestrian is already in the crosswalk and has the right of way. But of course he knows that the car should go, because the guy is waving him on and he's holding up the bus behind him. He is much better driver than FSD. This interaction is another good example that traffic is undeniably social. We are on the road with other people and they have places to go as well, and we must be considerate of that. FSD, by contrast, is not social. It cannot communicate, it doesn't understand that it was honked at, nor does it understand that the pedestrian waved it on. It operates entirely in its internal world in which all other road users aren't other human beings, but moving objects that must be avoided as if in a computer game. The next intersection is just as problematic. I will play it first.
Wow, what the heck? So that road's closed, which is where the car wants to go, and we have to turn right. So will it figure that out? There's also another million pedestrians. So turn signal there, although I think it was the wrong one. Yeah, it just wants to go around that closed road sign. So this is one of my biggest annoyances here. So I'm just gonna hit the brake, and yeah, he was getting confused by the car moving, and I have to reroute us because the car is gonna try to go around the closed road sign.
Although Chris can see that the software is planning to go into the blocked road, he tries to let the software drive to see if it can figure out that it should turn right rather than go straight, something he himself figured out right away. But when FSD bungles another interaction with a pedestrian, he decides to take over. Let's look at it in some detail. When the pedestrian aims for the crosswalk in front of the Tesla, FSD rolls to the pedestrian crossing and stops. Understandably, the pedestrian thinks it is stopping for him, and he waves to Chris in thanks as he continues towards the crosswalk, clearly convinced that there is an understanding, a social contract you could say, between himself and the driver of the Tesla that he can cross. But just when he steps into the road, FSD starts to drive once more. That is of course in direct contradiction with the just established social contract. By braking, Chris re-establishes the social contract that was momentarily in doubt, and the pedestrian waves to Chris a second time and now crosses. So again we can see how the self-driving software is an unreliable social actor. The pedestrian thinks it has stopped for him, so he waves, but just when the pedestrian starts to cross, the software starts to drive. The internal display makes clear how much difficulty FSD has in computing the pedestrian properly. The pedestrians flicker in and out and are frequently depicted in the wrong orientation. For a brief moment, the representation of the pedestrian turns blue, which is the color of a crossing pedestrian, but almost immediately the blue disappears as apparently the car's algorithm has now computed that the pedestrian will not be crossing in front of it. Obviously the wrong conclusion, but it makes it understandable that the car starts to drive. So that is not even 4.5 minutes of the video with one of the most recent updates of FSD in a medium-sized American city. After years and years of software development by really clever engineers and millions of test miles driven, billions of dollars invested, Tesla's FSD software is nowhere close to being a robocar. Even a fan like Chris is clear-eyed about that.
We're not robotaxi status, I can tell you that much.
Now some people say that Tesla's FSD is well behind the technology of other self-driving companies like Waymo, Zoox and Cruise.
Tesla wants a vision breakthrough to do it cheaper. They say all those extra tools are distractions, but the rest of the industry wants to use all the tools to get it done sooner, if at greater cost, and think Tesla is crippling itself. So far, based on the quality of the product, Tesla FSD is seriously far behind. The others are right.
While it may be true that the usage of LiDAR gives Waymo and Zoox and Cruise better perception, the problems I listed above are problems for any car controlled by software. To illustrate, just take this example from Waymo, which has been operating a robocar service in Chandler, Arizona without a driver for some time. The Waymo robotaxi has just turned into a neighborhood street where two adults are walking on the sidewalk behind two small children who look like they are on toy cars.
Sorry, self-driving car. It sees you, so no worries about that.
In this brief encounter, there are several moments of miscommunication. As the robotaxi approaches the intersection where it plans to turn right, the family arrives at the corner as well, clearly intent on going straight. The mother turns around to look at the Waymo over her left shoulder and then steps in front of the children and reaches out her hand, probably telling the kids to wait. The father, too, walks around the kids on the right side. Having controlled the children, the father now turns around and waves the Waymo on. However, it continues to slow down. Now the mother notices that the Waymo is not responding to her husband's invitation and also waves, but with no effect. The Waymo now actually stops. So there's a bit of an impasse. Probably confused, the mother crosses her arms and steps back onto the curb and waits. After a moment, the Waymo actually does move forward, but only a little bit, and then comes to a stop again. It is bewildering. And it is at this moment of maximum confusion that the passenger who made the video and calls himself JJ opens the right rear window and addresses the family.
Sorry, self-driving car.
Of course he has to say sorry. His car is driving in a very confusing way. But he also makes clear that he is not in charge of the Waymo because the car is driving itself. Reasonably, the mother decides that JJ's comments could mean that the car is incapable of responding to their repeated invitations to go, and that therefore it is just waiting for them to go first, and she steps out into the street to cross. But of course, just then, the Waymo starts to move also. The mother notices the car's movement and quickly returns to the curb. She says, "Oh, now it's going," and then, "Yeah, I'll just wait." This car is clearly incapable of coordinating its actions with them. Now you could argue everybody is safe, so what's the problem? But the only reason everybody is safe is because the family abandons their efforts to coordinate their actions with the Waymo and do what they had planned to do all along: stay put on the sidewalk and let the robot go first. So Waymo, which is supposed to be so far ahead of Tesla, according to Brad Templeton, has exactly the same problem as we saw with Chris and his Tesla. The software does not understand the social nature of traffic and how to interact with people. While the family attempts and ultimately fails to make sense of the car's behavior, the car is completely oblivious about what they are trying to communicate. Just like the Tesla, the Waymo operates in a virtual world that has only a passing resemblance to the real world and cannot interact with people in the real world. And unlike the passenger JJ, it has no sense that it is causing confusion. And that is one of the key reasons why we don't have self-driving cars yet. Self-driving cars simply do not operate in the same social world that we inhabit. Self-driving cars break the fundamental assumption we hold about all other drivers, namely that they are properly socialized members of society who can see and understand the world in much the same way we all can. People who can make judgments about what is safe and what isn't, and who can always be called upon to interact directly with others, to coordinate their actions, to maintain order, and to keep each other safe. Self-driving cars are a completely different kind of driver, and that simply is not safe. We do not allow dogs to drive because we know that they cannot understand human behavior and human traffic. Dogs have eyes and ears and brains and are even alive, and they have a desire not to get hurt. They are very capable, but when you see a dog on the road, you know in your gut that what the dog sees and understands about the world is just not the same as what you understand, and that therefore you cannot really trust them. For the same reason, we cannot trust self-driving cars. They don't see and understand the world the way we do. And therefore, software should not be allowed to drive on our streets without direct supervision of a human being.